I'm Veronica Vold. I'm the Open Education Instructional Designer with Open Oregon Educational Resources here in Oregon. And I had the pleasure of working with Elizabeth Pearce and Kim Puttman in spring 2022 to develop courses as part of our Targeted Pathways project. We design openly licensed textbooks and fully integrated course packs in human development and family services, in sociology, and criminal justice. And I'm with two of our team leaders today who both developed textbooks and taught integrated courses to talk about their choices with using open pedagogy to transform classroom and community. We used an equity-minded lens in our design work together, and today is a facilitated conversation to talk through what we learned, what we experienced, and to inspire and share tools with future educators who are interested in doing the same.
I'm Kim Puttman. I'm a relatively new teacher at Oregon Coast Community College, coming back to my discipline of sociology after many years away. I'm excited to be participating as the discipline lead for sociology at Open Oregon, as well as, like you said, Veronica, designing a class and writing a textbook at the same time, which is always interesting. Mm-hmm. But what's most exciting about it is our students. Our students are really behind this project, and we're using what we're learning in the classroom to transform our students' lives and change our communities.
Thank you, Kim. Would you introduce yourself, Liz?
Sure. I'm Liz Pearce. I teach at Lynn Benton Community College in Human Development and Family Studies, and you might also hear that referred to as HDFS as we go through this presentation. And I also am working with Open Oregon as the HDFS lead for our discipline. There's two textbooks I've worked on and have practiced open pedagogy with. One is for a class called Contemporary Families in the United States, and I'll probably mostly talk about that one today, and also for a textbook called Introduction to Human Services.
Let's draw that out a little bit more. Would you each share a little bit more about the course that you taught in spring?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. The course I taught of is Social Problems, SOC 206. At Oregon Coast, we're the tiniest college in Oregon, so I had 12 students. I worked with co-facilitator Bethany Grace Howe, who at the time was the executive director of Echo Mountain Fire Relief. Together, we presented a course that was on the ground in the classroom and on Zoom. The two things that I focused on for open pedagogy for this course were the final project for the students, where they could produce a video, a presentation, or a research paper on a social problem of their choice. And I also focused, because we were writing the textbook at the same time, I focused on encouraging the students to comment on the textbook so that I could understand which pieces were most relevant to them and which pieces needed a little more work before the students could really engage.
Yeah, and I was teaching the Contemporary Families class, and this class is a general education class, so that means there are majors in the class from all over the college, business majors, engineering majors, art majors, as well as people who want to be, say, social workers or teachers in the HDFS area. And I chose this spring to work with a colleague of mine, a real master teacher in the environmental sciences. He was teaching environmental justice, and we have some shared outcomes in our courses. And so we decided to teach together and share a lot of assignments, including the open pedagogy assignments. So we did some teaching in our own rooms, and sometimes we came together and taught together, including with the open pedagogy. And in this particular case, we were asking students to contribute something to a textbook, and they got to kind of choose from an array of what topics they would like to contribute, including in the environmental justice arena.
In our community, we experienced the Otis wildfire about 2 years ago, and many of my students are wildfire survivors, and our community is still recovering from the fire. For me and for my students, transforming in the classroom and community was two things. One was really centering student voices and student stories throughout our classroom experience so that students could talk about their experiences. And almost more importantly, what were people doing to build resilience and joy and self-reliance in their own lives and in their own work? And then the second piece of transforming the classroom and community was really talking to people in our community who were experiencing some of the problems that we were talking about theoretically in the classroom. So the students got the opportunity to do interviews, sometimes of each other, sometimes of community members, or look at secondary sources, look at blogs and websites and other things that were going on in our community to be able to make a difference. One of the outcomes of our class was that our students are actually succeeding in setting up a needs closet at our college. And so part of the support of the class was to allow the students to really talk about what a needs closet would be and how they might get supplies and so that they could stay in school a little longer because they had toothbrushes and enough to eat, and get a much better, deeper framework about understanding that these are deep problems for our entire society and that all of us have a hand in doing transformation.
I'm so glad you said that, because I feel like that's really a big part of the transformational learning that in a way it's almost more like a transformational role, right? That students see themselves differently. They see themselves not just as consumers of knowledge, but also creators of knowledge and with expertise to share. It's different than some kind of the old school or traditional, have everybody study one thing and then stand up and present it to the class, right? It's more about them really learning about something that they care about and being able to share it in a way that lasts for a long time, not just for one presentation or something that the teacher grades and then returns to them. And what David
Wiley.
Yes, the disposable assignment, right? It's used once and then it's gone. So yeah, that's the transformational part, that they can be a part of something that other people are going to read or look at or listen to in the future. When I first wrote the textbook, I had a group of students who helped with the structuring, the brainstorming, and the writing. And I think that was what I didn't understand then was how intimidating it might be to students to see themselves in that role of creating something, writing something that someone else would read. So that's, to me, that is what the transformation is about, is helping students to see themselves differently.
So one of the things I really learned from you, Liz, is you shared with me a little chart that says what's the simple ways, the low risk ways that students can participate in open pedagogy, and then what are the higher risk, higher skill ways that students can participate. And I really leaned on that chart to come up with some design so that students could participate at whatever level they felt comfortable. So there absolutely was some student-centered design that had to do with the final projects, producing the videos or the presentations or whatever that looked like. But then there were some lower stakes opportunities to really say, what services in the community have helped you deal with this problem? Things like that were much lower stakes in terms of this is a durable assignment that other people might share, because it was really limited to just the classroom, but it also helped people bring resources and get resources for solving particular social problems that they were dealing with.
Yeah, and that chart you're referring to, Kim, was created by Sylvia Lynn at the State University of New York, and it's part of a collaborative article that she and I and 3 other people wrote together, and is openly licensed. So I think we can attach that to the presentation. That is a great chart.
Yeah, it really opened my thinking about what the possibilities really were, and how scary it is for students because I think as educators, it's really exciting to say you're part of a bigger community, and part of being part of that community is stepping up and contributing your piece. But for students, that bigger community isn't always, but can be really scary.
Mhm.
And so figuring out how to make the contributions really low stakes, because sometimes even writing a paragraph is scary enough. And so having that paragraph being shared more widely, even in the classroom, that it is as much as some students can manage, depending on where they're at in their educational trajectory.
Yeah, one of the assignments,
Yeah.
I developed it actually for my Intro to Human Services class. I developed a sort of checklist and question sheet for students to evaluate a chapter from the textbook. And so, Veronica, you were asking about centering student agency. So, and that's what I saw as sort of that first, a step into seeing themselves as evaluators and assessors of a textbook before they were creating something to go in a textbook. That was a really good activity for students to see themselves in a different role.
The social problems material is really challenging because many of my students are experiencing the social problems that we're talking about.
Right.
And for some students, it's really healing to bring their own stories and be heard and be valued for people who are successfully dealing with whatever the challenge is. And for some students, the classroom isn't the right place to do that work, and they really need to take a much more academic and intellectual approach. So one of the things I did around student choice was to make sure that I had an assignment that encouraged disclosure if a student was willing to disclose. And then I had an assignment that was much more sort of traditionally academic and intellectual. So a student could explore the impact of a particular change in law, for example, as a way of talking about a social problem. Or they could talk about, the experience of whatever that social problem might be. So they really had options about disclosing or not disclosing. And I said regularly, you don't have to talk about it if you don't want to.
Yeah. I really appreciate the idea that students are managing the same social problems that they were studying, and that they might need opportunities to tap in to different parts of their experience or knowledge or their response, and honoring that as a way of keeping people engaged and building trust and safety in the classroom.
I guess a big learning is just realizing how often students are in a room and maybe you're talking about something that they really don't understand yet, and maybe that because I haven't made it transparent enough or clear enough, and because I have the role of authority in the room, they're more likely to kind of agree or go along, and I may not really know what they're thinking. And so it's like so important to have so many avenues where students can communicate back to you what they're thinking, and not just rely on saying, oh, if you have questions, you can come talk to me later, or I have an open door policy and come talk to me. You really have to have methods for students to give you feedback, and let you know what's really happening for them and what they're understanding and not understanding, right? So in relation to this particular project, I showed them samples from the book they had been reading. And so we had them in, students were in like groups of 4 or 5 around a bunch of different tables. And if you see on the right-hand side, those 6 lists of things, those are actually 6 elements in the textbook they were already reading. All things that students had created. And I either printed them out or they used their computers to link to them at their table. And then have a discussion and talk about these 3 questions that they had over on the left-hand side. And I think it was like just seeing the light bulbs go on, like, oh, this is what it means to do open pedagogy. This is what it means to have something in the textbook, and that it was a doable chunk. I tried to choose things that were short and manageable. And I guess the most powerful moment was a student told me he was going to do the non-open pedagogy project previously. And after this class, he came to me and he said, I didn't think that I fit in. I didn't think that I could be a part of the textbook. And when I saw these, I realized that me and my family fit in. And he did a really powerful case study for the textbook.
In previous conversations, we've talked about this tension between we want students to be contributors and creative people and be able to tell their own stories and what they're learning. And yet we live in a world that's full of polished Facebook posts and professional media and things like that. So the bar that we set in our culture for what good enough looks like to be shared with the world is really high.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me as a new teacher, part of it is, what are the small things that students can do to contribute to the conversation in our wider communities? And what does good enough really look like? And I think that's a great question to reflect back to students, because it's part of the social construction of our world.
And even inviting that question of who would you want to share this with, I think turns on its head how assessments usually run, or how a grade is usually calculated, because you're giving the student this new role in generating the knowledge and understanding and learning that's happening in the classroom. So I love that question. What is good enough? And it's not straightforward. There isn't like a clear use this in every case model. I think the model itself is having that humility and inviting students to consider who benefits from their work, and how do they benefit from their work? What do they take? What do they want to contribute?
So I think informed consent really touches on what we've been talking about as students, as agents in their own lives and in their own communities, that students really get to say, this is my work and I do want to contribute it to the wider world, or I really don't want to contribute it to the wider world. And we talk about it in the classroom. For the next time I teach this course, it will actually be our ethics discussion as researchers and sociologists and participants in our own communities. What is powerful about our own stories? What is powerful about other people's stories and intellectual work? I would have had that conversation way earlier in the class as a way of reassuring students that they really had power.
I would just add a couple things. One is, just some of the practical reasons that students might not want their names out there. And that was really helpful to have that myself, made aware of that. And for like you were talking about, people who might not be documented, or people who, for whatever reason might not want their story to be told publicly or have their name attached to it. The other thing for brand new people, like if you're doing this, it's really helpful to have someone else who knows more about this. It's like if you do have an OER librarian at your institution, that really, like a lot of that for me in the beginning, I had someone who was helping me along the way doing that. And our institution went without an OER librarian for about a year and a half, I think. And I have really missed that, having someone in that role. But that was the person who kind of helped me make sure that I met the legal requirements by working with the registrar's office with the informed consent, and helped me understand the personal ramifications and all of that. I would like to add also having a couple introductory documents for students that explain open education and explain open pedagogy. And Veronica created this great one-pager. I think, short and to the point is really important about open pedagogy. And then actually a student of mine, Alexis Castaneda Perez, he created a one-pager about open education and accessibility. And those were like, I tried not to teach, everything about open education to these 10-week students, right? You have to pick and choose how much you can share. And so those 2 one-pagers were really helpful in the process.
Mm-hmm.
Bethany Grace Howe was my co-facilitator in the class. She happens to be a journalist and communications expert. And as part of this course, we also were able to access videographers through the Open Oregon Project. That gave us a rich environment for learning for our students and for ourselves. And we were able to produce some guides around how to formulate interview questions that made sense, how to storyboard a video, how to actually set up the interview so that the technology worked in a way that made sense, and then what to do in post-production. For me as a new teacher, all of those things were outside of my wheelhouse. So being able to depend on a statewide project and my co-facilitator was amazing because I learned about all of those steps. And now we do have templates and guides that are openly licensed that other people can share.
Oh my gosh, Kim, that is so amazing. I'm so excited about that. I was wondering how you knew and did all that video stuff.
And one thing that I've heard from folks who are adopting open pedagogy projects for the first time is that heavy lift and recognizing that it's not going to flow the way that you imagine it will flow the first time, and having that be okay, that this is an iterative process. You can learn alongside your students. And as long as you're centering their experiences, their voices, and their agency and power, as both of you have done, it's a positive outcome. For someone that's never worked with an instructional designer before, would you mind sharing what's the benefit to an open pedagogy project to have an instructional designer present?
I've been teaching for many years, but I'm also someone who's very motivated to grow and develop. And so having an instructional designer, I think at any stage of your career can help you improve what you're doing. I would say the instructional designer helped me to be more transparent so that students have much more clear expectations about all aspects of the course.
Mm-hmm. If I were doing this by myself, I might have gotten there in 10 years or so as I've been exploring my field. But especially at a small community college where I'm a department of one, being able to rely on a whole team of people, Veronica included, has really shortened the time it takes to access expertise. People have been doing this work for a long time in many different contexts. So having a person who's truly an expert in saying, this is what works for students, this is how other instructors have solved that problem, this is what you could consider to make it better, really has improved the quality of my teaching and my course design in ways that I couldn't have imagined when I started this project.
And you always make me feel like it's all my own idea. Which I know it isn't.
I think for those watching who are interested in working with an instructional designer, I think I became an instructional designer because I think we're stronger together. And because I think that no one should have to develop pieces of educational technology or new learning opportunities alone. And I think as an instructional designer, I learned for both of you. And I think it helps our work with our students to make it that much deeper, that much richer, and to help center what they need from us. So something to consider for those who are pursuing open pedagogy projects, to find instructional design support either on your campus or to reach out to your open education community to see if grant-funded support might be possible to continue to build your team, to champion your students and your work.
I would say as part of this conference, if people want to reach out for me to get more reach out to me to get more resources, I'm always happy to have conversations about that. Because I learn from the people who ask the questions as much as they learn from me.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us today.
Mhm.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank